Welcome to Precision Golf. Today we're going to be talking about the latest range of Velocore or Velocore Plus shafts. So this isn't going to be a comparison between first generation and second generation. We're going to be looking at the three models, how do they differ and why would one suit a particular playing style and player type. So we're going to start with the Red. Now the Red, traditionally designed around the higher launch, higher spin, and this is no different. This still keeps a softer tip design, softer tip profile. The Velocore series is really designed around consistency of strike, consistency of face delivery, and ultimately from a material point of view, it tightens that core up and at impact reduces a bit of twisting and therefore shot dispersion, but also makes more consistent the way the shaft loads, unloads, bends and droops through the swing, so it makes it easier to strike the center of the face. And this is why it's been such a consistent but also popular model on tour and with fitters globally for the last couple of years. The Velocore Plus series, the one thing I will say relative to the first generation, they've slightly changed the multi-material bias core, and bias core means it's different layering, different directions of layering of the materials, which helps stability and feel, but there's an additional layer on that. So ultimately the second generation Velocore, the Velocore Plus, is really geared around upping that stability but maintaining feel, and that's a really key aspect of these models. All of them relative to first generation have noticeably more feel to them through the shaft. So how do they perform? Ventus Red, second generation Red, is noticeably a little bit tighter in the butt section from a feel point of view to first gen. And that really gives, I think, keeps that sense of feel and stability, that feeling of stability. So rather than the loose playing shaft, which is sort of flipping through the tip to try and get a bit of flight, it still has a crisp feel to it. So I'm going to hit a couple, describe the feel, compare the three, and then we'll look at the data and some of the design aspects afterwards just to give you an insight into those. So let's hit a couple with this. Got to put the glove on. So I've got this in the same head that I use, TSR3. So we'll hit a couple with each, describe how they feel. So, to waggle with, this is always one of the tests the golfers like to do. We like to kind of lean on shafts and give it a wobble around. What you often get from a higher flighted shaft is a softer, more sort of wobbly kind of feel, and whilst there is some load and movement in the bottom half, actually this upper half is really quite stable. I think that's a noticeable change with this series of the Red shaft. So whilst it's stable at the handle end, you definitely get a feel of load and for want of a better phrase, kick, whip, however you want to describe it, through the mid to lower section. And that's really an aspect of the Red series where it's stable at the top and then softer through the bottom relative to the other shafts. And that helps maintain a little bit of spin, certainly give a little bit more feeling of kick, and maintain a little bit more flight relative to the other models. And whilst that upper half is stable, it doesn't feel like you've got to work the shaft hard to get the results out of it. And I think that's a really key aspect of this shaft. So hit that, let's switch over to the Blue. So we'll move up to the next shaft in this series. So the Blue, whilst the Red is designed for responsive tip, the Blue is a much stiffer tip section. So both Blue and Black series are designed around a very, very stable tip design to stabilize spin. Again, keep that club face control, club head control and stability through impact. Factor into this, the Blue also has a noticeably stiffer butt section as well. So whereas the Red is a pretty stiff butt section, the Blue's stiffer again. But what the Blue does is rather than going stable, a little bit less stable, softer, the Blue is very stable, softer, very stable. So you get the feedback of the shaft through the midsection on this rather than out of the tip section on the Red. And that creates quite a different sensation to hit with. But ultimately this is designed around really tightening up, lowering the spin, tightening up the dispersion, and providing a lower spin option off the tee without being a brute of the shaft. We'll come on to the Black from that point of view, but without being overly harsh. So the Blue profile was still a smoother feeling shaft. So again with this, we do the waggle test, you can see the movement in a slightly different place. It's slightly higher up the shaft rather than being through the bottom, and that absolutely matches the design profile of this series. So moving up to the Blue, actually swings, from a balance point of view, swings a little less tip heavy than the red. So the blue series actually, from an ease of swinging point of view, whilst the red you get that real kind of sense of load and whip through the bottom half, the blue actually swings slightly lighter from a balance point of view. So you do get that bit of movement and bit of responsiveness out the midsection, but then it's really nice and tight at the bottom. So for someone looking for a little bit of help back and a little bit of feedback from the shaft, but a really tight impact position, the blue's a great model. Generally, described as suiting a slightly smoother load profile, someone who accelerates with a kind of smoother pattern to it, versus someone that changes direction hard. This is a shaft that gives you something back, but then also gives you that stability at impact. So let's move up to the black. So the black series, really for the strongest swingers in principle. It's a very, very stable tip section, but this is where it shifts quite dramatically actually. I mean, the first generation black was a very, very strong feeling shaft, really tight feeling. You felt like you really had to work the shaft to get the results out of it. So great for heavy loader and a hard swinger, more of a hitting action. What's changed, certainly from a feel point of view, with the second generation black is it's less harsh in the butt section, then much more stable through that mid to lower section. So it's that lower 2/3 of the shaft that really gives that stability, but they just tone down the butt section a little bit so it doesn't feel as brutal. And I think that's one of the bits of feedback from Tour has been the second generation series is a smoother feeling shaft. It's really, you get some responsiveness from it without losing that sense of control. And black, again, more than the other two, I think, has changed that level of feedback, but keeping that low spin element to it. So let's move on up to the black. Again, you can really straight away feel that kind of holding on. That lower half doesn't really move in the same way you get the flow out of the other two. So, this one is a shaft. Again, like the blue, nowhere near as tip heavy as first generation. So that feeling of having to really kind of work that first generation and fetch the bottom end through, which also gave it that feeling of strength. This is nowhere near that same balance point, so they've shifted the balance point up the shaft noticeably versus first generation. But again, a very, very tight, stable feel at impact. So I put a bit more into that one, but the shaft feels like it can really cope with that. There's a real crispness at impact, but not with that same hardness that we used to get with the first generation. So what they've done is they've managed to tone it down a little bit from a feel point of view and give a bit of, I think the best way of describing it, taking the kind of hardness out of the feeling, whilst retaining that absolute kind of control, crispness, stability at impact, the way you just know this shaft can stand up to a lot of, I won't quite call it abuse, but you can take a lot of stick. So how does that impact on results? We'll pair them up in terms of results. So the bottom two are with the red, the middle two with the blue, and the top two with the black. So what we can see from this is, there was one with the red that picked the launch angle up, that went to 13 degrees. Blue and the blue, very, very stable, 11.5. Now some of this is to do with how well the shaft swings for me. The better the balance point and the shaft weight work for me, the more consistently I'm going to deliver them. So this is human testing rather than robot testing, so I must point that out now. But what we can certainly see is there are a couple of very low spin numbers out of the blue and the black, just sort of around the, on the 2000 or just sub 2000. The black's definitely brought that launch angle down a little bit, but we're looking at 100 or 200 revolutions difference between those two. Again, a lot of this is how the shafts suit the individual. What you aren't going to see, even particularly on a robot test, is vast differences in numbers in terms of launch angle and spin profile between the three shafts. We'll see, as we can here, the red, they're both spinning just under 2,400, one just over 2,400. The blue, there's one, first one at 2,400, the next one was that little bit lower, is a better contact. Just brought that spin rate down, and the black are both down around the 2,000 mark. So there is a bit of a graduation to it, but ultimately there's a big difference in the way they feel, and golfers, we all respond to that feel. So things like bend profile, flex, yes, you get some slightly different numbers out of them, but some players are going to respond much better to a more sort of gradual response and load and kick you get through the red profile versus the black, where that bottom half is really stable, and people are going to commit more to that versus feeling like you've got to launch yourself at it and hit at it. So both are equally as important. What we can see is how stable the numbers are on all of these. So for the red, which is a higher spinning shaft, it's actually still pretty moderate on the spin level. Both the blue and the black are down in kind of stronger, lower launch patterns. What I'm also going to show you now is we're going to cut to a screen which shows the actual EI curve and profile of these shafts, just to show on a diagram where those bend profiles change. So once we look at the screen now, what you can see here is that purple line here, that's the blue profile. So actually the blue profile is the stiffest in the handle end. So as we're looking from left to right across the graph here, the left side is closest to the grip end and the right side's closest to the tip of the shaft, to the club head end. And then vertically, that's the stiffer. So you can see on any shaft, the grip end is going to be the stiffest part of the shaft and the tip end the softest as the shaft narrows down. So when we're talking about stiff tip and soft butt, actually it doesn't get progressively stiffer as you go down the shaft, it actually softens off, but again it's proportionate to one another. So looking at the three shafts here, I'll start with the blue. We can see you're very stable in that handle end, and then actually goes into match where the black is in the tip. So they're just as stiff as one another in the very tip end, but that softer, what I'll call belly of the shaft here, that softer midsection, softer than the red profile, actually that's the bit that gives you that feeling of a little bit of load, a little bit of kick. But that stable tip section here is what then clings on through the ball, through impact, and gives that real stable contact point. Moving on to the red, again, stiffer handle end than the white, stiffer handle than the black profile. I'm getting my Mitsubishi and Fuji shafts mixed up. Freudian slip. So very stable on the handle end, and that's when we said when you move the shaft around, it feels still nice and tight under the grip end. So it doesn't feel loose all the way down the shaft. And actually doesn't soften quite as quickly into the midsection as the blue. So actually stays pretty stable through that upper midsection. But then as we get to the mid and lower half, we can see that graph, that keeps on going down, keeps softening off. So that tip section is really giving a little bit more and kicking that bit more. But you're feeling that flow of energy through the bottom half of the shaft. A very consistent pattern as it softens off down to the tip section. And then we move to the black. So actually the softest in the grip end of each of these, and I must point out, these are all same weight and stiffness within that range, so it's like for like comparison. So I haven't gone to a 5X or a 7S, or these are all the 65 gram in the Stifflex. So the softest handle end, because if it ramped up the same way as the others, it would feel like an absolute plank. So getting that bit of feedback and that smoothness to the shaft, that's what that section does. But then as we can see here, that just doesn't really soften off very much as you work down the shaft. So that lower 2/3 of the shaft really stays very stable, and that is what gives that rigidity, tightness, stability, and really kind of hangs on through the shot. So there's really very little give, very little movement proportionate to the other two in that lower half of the shaft. So these sort of diagrams are what gives me a huge amount of information, and something that is very rarely able to be seen in a comparison like this outside of R&D. So really pleased we're able to share this with you. Really grateful to the guys at COOLCLUBS for the S3 data to be able to share that with you, and hopefully that gives you a better understanding of the three Velocore Plus models and what they do and why they do it, and that should help you pick the right shaft for you.